Thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been Yidishin with Unpopular Front. Today, we have a very special guest, someone I reached out to a few months ago. I had kind of been stalking him online, very slightly, just a little bit. Benny Haveli, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Benny. We know each other from Medium, maybe possibly one of the only good relationships to come out of Medium.
I know, it's really true. Like everything I ever see on Medium, I don't know if it's like the algorithm is like just designed for people's hate reading or something, but I never get anything. I never get anything good.
My memories of using Medium are like my suggested bar will be like Unpopular Front and with your like 5-minute read awesome articles, and then it'll be like Unpopular Front, read it.
Thank you.
All right, I read that. Now let's see what else suggested for me. 17-minute read. How the Bernie Bros and the feminists are both Marxists destroying America. I know, I'm a Marxist. Holy shit. And it'll have like 1,000 hits, like 1,000 claps.
I know. So much. I know they're like their numbers are so much bigger than anything. Like I think the biggest thing I ever got on Medium was, and this is not bragging because this is astronomically higher than anything I ever got. It wasn't even that big. It was like a few thousand reads, and it was purely because I like just annoyed the shit out of people on social media and like posted it in all these Reddit groups just trying to get it published because the Medium algorithm didn't do shit for me for that, So
the most hits I ever got, like, all right, here's a funny thing just about algorithms. Like there's a time earlier when I had a blogger, like in the late aughts, mid to late aughts was like the height of it, back when like there was still an illusion that you could just launch a career from Blogger. So I'd be trying to go for the algorithm with a lot of stuff. Like every post was called "How to Do This." Like,
exactly.
And but the most hits I ever got was there was an Irish rock musician, Rory Gallagher, who I just happened to write a post about him in list form, and apparently all of Ireland viewed it. And all of like Belgium and these other countries where he was like extremely popular. Yeah. But then after I was like, oh man, I'm on a roll. This was maybe 2011. So I was like, I finally made it. But that nothing after that. Like it's such a crapshoot.
Exactly. Yeah, it's sort of like circumstance and just getting it in front of the right people.
Yeah,
the whole illusion of these like blogging platforms, I think giving us agency and like a wider audience is just kind of bullshit, it seems. Yeah. Like you still have to go through gatekeepers,
Exactly. And two things like related to that. I want to say one is directly related to that. One's a sort of side note. The second like most hits I ever got was on Medium. And it was when I wrote something. I wrote, "How to write a real left critique of Chapo Trap House."
I read that one.
Yeah, so that one, but so I feel like I did a decent job on that, and like
that was
they read it. Yeah, they read it. They read it. They like reposted it. They're like, "Oh, this is interesting. Like a criticism from an actual fan of ours who's like taking us seriously." Then they posted that, and that's I think why it got all those hits. But the funny thing was, I noticed how the sort of material conditions, this is to be a little Marxian about it, but this is really true. The material conditions of that, I guess you could call it an economy of like blogging, right? It can sort of make it easy to start believing that like it wasn't just luck of the draw. I was like, you know what? Content about Chapo is good, as opposed to just it happens to be hot right now,
Right.
Like I sort of, and I feel I remember at one point it hit me like, oh, I just struck while the iron was hot. That doesn't, that's really what happened. Was a lot of people were posting about Chapo and clicking stuff about Chapo for like a couple months, and like all this hype of like, are they the new voices post Trump? No, no, that which is like, oh my God,
No,
I cringe looking back in that, and I almost
I
feel
know.
guilty like I contributed to it. But at the time, I was like,
Ah,
we're all writing about this. This is good. This is like really important. No, it was like
yeah,
it was just a
exactly.
hot topic. Uh,
Right. I mean, I listened to the show. I think I was, like a lot of people were probably inspired to do more media stuff after seeing that. But, it's not the like they are just a representation and they're just like
mhm,
one entity reflecting on this much larger thing. And so much like online stuff, and it seems to me at least a lot of the stuff that gets a lot of attention, it's just basically just sort of like boring media criticism, like
mhm.
critiquing, MSNBC or critiquing Chapo.
Yeah,
But really, it's like we're not really talking about the actual structures of power. We're just sort of like, yeah, Joyanne Reed's stupid. And like, she kind of is.
yeah.
I don't disagree, but like, I don't know. I kind of just wonder how much of sort of the blogging stuff, because it is true. You got like the stuff that you're getting the most reading on was sort of in the realm of media criticism versus like you've written
So
about other
true.
stuff too.
Yeah.
And it all just kind of comes back to that. I think it's because it's like, we're so much of our like lives are just spent consuming media. So we think that that's like what the world is.
Right, exactly. And like, I was legitimately thinking a lot about that today, and that like, there's a community basically of people who are reading and reposting and criticizing stuff all day online. And
Mm-hmm.
it's largely because we've either lack the energy or are maybe have the energy but are too lazy. In my case, it
Yeah.
goes between both. Although I've had like lately I've been really exhausted by work, and I'll see a notification to go to a meeting, or just do
Sure.
canvassing, and just sadly lately, I've never had the energy that I like have had in the past for it. I hope I will find a good way to make the
Yeah.
energy for it
Yeah.
in the future. Like for example with Cortez here in New York, and Salazar, who's
Uh
another
huh.
person running. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
Salazar's
She's
great.
good. Great.
There was a person. Sorry if you heard a little. Thought I accidentally tapped my microphone there. Um, the
It's
district
Wi-Fi.
Salazar's running on. There was a previous challenger to her about 2 years ago, Medina. Sorry, not to her, challenge to her, to him, Dilan, the guy who's there.
Yeah.
Um, Medina,
Uh huh.
who was an older, more experienced community organizer, um, who had like a little bit of non-political baggage in her past. Um, and I canvassed for her. She like basically, I'm not sure what a chance she had in the first place, but they released something about her, uh, basically like it was kind of a grim story. So I don't that like people can Google it if they want. Debbie
Yeah.
Medina if they're really curious. But it's a grim story
Sure.
about
Sure.
like a criminal past that you can't help but cringe at, but also you feel bad. You feel definitely feel bad for her and sympathize with her also. But that came out, and that like then the people basically stopped campaigning for her after that. Maybe a combination of trying to preserve
Yeah.
themselves and maybe legitimately thinking she didn't have a chance. But back then I remember it was yeah, it's great when you have the energy to do it, like because it's hard work. I would go into all the canvassing I did for her, sometimes with a partner, sometimes not, was in some of the last projects in central Brooklyn, speaking
Mm-hmm.
mostly Spanish, um, to people who are used to speaking like minimal Spanish with people who don't speak that much Spanish. So it's kind of like not that hard for my like mediocre Spanish, and they were like not they weren't impatient. They're like, yeah, we talk to people who speak mediocre Spanish
Sure.
all the time. That's like that's how we yeah, exactly.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
like,
They live in
they're like, yeah, I don't,
America.
my
I'm
English isn't that good,
sure.
so if you speak bad Spanish, great, I appreciate that. So like, I remember that was I remember teaching a lot of
Right.
people what a primary was in the first place, uh, and that was sort of
Yeah.
like a valuable thing that I took with me is like that's a lot of the work of canvassing is teaching people, there is this election here. Um, and it's an actual thing that can make a difference. Um, and I've really liked doing
Right.
it, it's a thing where I can appreciate that like every time I've seen a canvassing like training for I mean, training, obviously you know what to do, but they give you the materials, tell you what not to say, tell you which app to use and stuff. For Cortez, every time it came up,
Right.
I had either just had a sleepless night related to work or like related to other stuff. And it's yeah, no, it's really
For
too bad.
sure.
So anyway, just to get back to the original thing you started saying is like so criticizing media becomes an outlet. The more, and for sure,
Yeah.
the less I have the energy to do that, the more I either sit at home after work, be like, all right, let me see what everyone's talking about online today, or at work during the downtime during. I have like a
Yeah.
very stop and go job
Oh,
where it's
sure.
either pretty idle or extremely busy, so it's very conducive to, all right, I know that after this hour I'm going to be running around all day, so I'm going to have a second window open and read what everyone's talking about online right now. So it's like it's almost the natural outlet of
Exactly.
today when you don't
Yeah.
have the time to do other organizing, and that's reality, and that's fine. But like, I do wonder if I'm doing a good enough job reminding myself that like that's why I'm criticizing media all day and taught. Um,
Right. No, I'm right there with you. I even have a
mm,
similar. I mean, my old job, I was a preschool teacher, and that
gotcha.
definitely was just go 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 go. But I'm nannying to like
Mm,
rich
mm,
families' babies, and there is a lot of time. Yeah, and I've definitely noticed that I've got way more sucked into social media and way more sucked into the sort of kind
oh
of
yeah,
like the daily hate and sort of the daily topic of like so angry at this right
yeah.
wing commentator or something, and and kind of like getting caught up in those news cycles is. I mean, I've seen it drive my parents crazy because
Yeah.
ever since Trump became president, all they do is both. Like my parents are divorced. They've
Mm,
been divorced for like almost 15 years.
mm.
They're so different, but it seems that Trump brought together a love of MSNBC.
Uh,
Finally, they could finally
yeah.
do something together. And you just see just like the psychic drain on this generation
Mm,
of liberals because they just get so sucked into that like day by
yeah.
day thing. And I don't know. I mean, it just seems like I wonder how important that is in understanding things, and also how it kind of takes things out
Mm,
of history and just sort of puts it into this sort of neat little bubble. And I guess that's kind of why maybe I'd love to talk to you. I don't know if you're listening and you don't listen to the podcast Champagne Sharks. You should. It's a very good show. Um, and Benny was recently on it. So that was cool to hear him on it. And he talked about um, a
I
lot
was
of
really
stuff. It's a
happy with
great
him.
show, it really is.
T is great. D
But
Mills
we
is great. I
talked,
love those guys.
yeah, yeah, totally. And you guys talked about, with the child detention centers and this sort of ramping up of ICE into, just like a straight up, Gestapo style police force that is essentially doing
Yeah.
ethnic cleansing in some ways. Um, Talking about sort of the use of,
Yeah.
I guess, World War II metaphors, right? And specifically, his historically referencing Jewish trauma. And I had already read some of Benny's stuff and already kind of knew you. You come from a very similar background to me. I think we're both. You said, I think on Champagne Sharks, you said you trace back your family to being.
Oh
You
yeah.
mentioned like the
Yes.
pogroms in Russia, and that was exactly
Hmm.
my. That was my folks too. I think they were in
Oh yeah.
modern day
Yeah.
Belarus, but
Same
so it's all the
empire.
same
Yeah.
big czarist. Exactly, it was a big empire, guys. It was huge. That's the Russians we should be
Yeah.
afraid of. Actually, those are the
Yeah.
scariest Russians
Yeah.
ever. I have
Just
to
to
say.
make a side note about Russia, like
Uh,
the funny thing is, like I remember when Putin hype was first getting big, long before Trump, like there was a Time magazine or one of
mhm.
those magazines said Czar Putin. like drawing those parallels, and it's like, yeah, it is freaking scary. Guess what? It's
Yeah,
completely the U.S.'s fault that he's there. We put his party there undemocratically. We created that shit. It sucks now. Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. We said better to have a czar than to have like
yeah,
a like
better.
leftist government or even like a like
Yeah,
social
exactly. We were
democratic
like, oh,
government.
Russia wants to transition from being communist to being a social democracy like Norway. Let's put a czar there instead. Great idea, guys. Yeah.
I know. Exactly. And now we're also
Yeah.
scared of them.
Who would have,
Oh
who
man.
among us hasn't
Such a
installed somebody who's eventually going to be our biggest enemy? Who among us, you know?
I mean, honestly, when I was a preschool teacher, I felt like that was every day. You're just rewarding some kid.
Oh my God.
You're like telling him that he's really good, and then he just thinks he can just take whatever paints he wants. He's like, my family had this paint 200 years ago. Whatever. So
Yeah, that's like
yeah.
that's a good
So
metaphor.
yeah. So we were sort of talking. You guys were talking on that about this particular. There was a particular thread by a writer that stuck out to me even before the episode was written. Partially because I searched out to find some person making this argument who I didn't think was a total
Hmm.
right wing monster. And I realized, oh, it's also like a really popular writer
Uh,
here in Seattle who's like friends with a bunch of
yes.
people I know. So why not invite on someone else to talk about it with me so I can make a few random enemies? I hope not. I hope not. But there was a Twitter thread by writer Ijeoma Lowu. She's a Seattle writer here in Seattle who knows a lot of friends of mine. Oh God, I'm so nervous. Um, and she was writing about sort of this idea that people who are Jews can have, that like Jewish people deserve the right to say if you can use the historical trauma and these particular examples, like if you can use them in rhetoric, right? She was saying that like it's if Jews feel uncomfortable with us using concentration camp parallels, then we shouldn't use that because we don't have to. And I don't know, that thread kind of bothered me. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on it, and then I'll make a bunch of
My
people
thoughts
angry.
originally about it were more vague, but what T and D Mills said on Champagne Sharks was something really interesting, which was they said that they think that a lot of Black Americans will see how white people, such as Jews, especially somebody who sort of became more white over time, such as Jews, see how they
Right. Yeah.
gained that status. You call it whiteness, but
Hmm.
to be more vague about it, that status,
Yeah.
by saying we own this trauma, by saying I'm outraged in a way that you don't understand and you have to respect. Um, and the particular
Right.
reason that that stands out, uh, I think, is because basically, like looking back, you see a lot of leftist collaboration between black people, Jewish people, and other people who were less white once, you know?
Absolutely.
And so when you look at that,
Totally.
that's at heart like the modern frame we have of each identity group owning the specific trauma and believing that it's impenetrable. Um, Especially before, the Holocaust, but honestly, for a long time after, too, it seems. Like that idea we have now that trauma is something that each group owns differently and that is almost intimidating because no one outside can understand it. I don't, it really seems like that
Right.
wasn't a thing, and that's a thing that slowly came in. And it just seems the most clear with Jewish people. And like I said this also on the Champagne Sharks episode, Elie Wiesel, who I remember like meeting as a kid at my Jewish school, like all these famous writers and scholars who survived the Holocaust or who were experts about it, but specifically often people who were there. Um, like it's a weird thing I've noticed. Odds are, if you went to a Jewish private school like I did in upstate New York, um, they like there's not that many. There's a lot of them, but there's not that many of them. And maybe you have the experience in Dallas too. Like they'll do the tours of America, and like odds are you will meet somebody very famous and Jewish at some point, like at synagogue or in Hebrew school, right? So like he's definitely
Right.
he was a bit present in my mind, but I sort
Yeah.
of revisited his ideas later, um, and realized, as Corey Robbins sort of points out in this one essay on a blog called Crooked Timber, um, the way that he talks about the Holocaust is a very defensive, or depending on how you look at it, offensive. Not in like, oh, that's not correct, but offensive is in like sort of aggressive way, saying like, you don't get to say anything about this. This stands outside history. Only we, the Jewish people who were there, own it. Which just which is it's a pretty unique perspective that I think a lot of us take for granted. Um, and for me, and I imagine for you maybe too, I associated that
Yeah.
specifically with Zionism. That idea of like, don't question what Israel's doing. Nobody understands this trauma. We own
Exactly.
it. Whatever we do is correct because we own the trauma of the Holocaust, and this is happening because of that. Meanwhile, just a side note, you
Right.
have Israelis who survived the Holocaust saying, Gaza Strip reminds me of the ghetto that my parents were in before they got killed. And he'll have Israeli celebrities say that, get
Right.
deplatformed for saying that. So it's like there's not even a consensus among people who survived the Holocaust that this is the only way to deal with trauma. But yeah.
No, no, of course. I mean, it's this idea is very. I just recently finished Assad Hyder's
Oh, yeah,
newest
how was
book.
it?
I guess it's his only book. It's
Oh,
great.
good.
It's really good. It's also hopefully I can get this episode out by the end of the day, but it's $1 on the Verso
Oh,
website.
awesome.
So you
The
got to read
ebook.
it, guys. It's great. It's short. Yeah, the
Oh,
ebook.
hell
It's a
yeah.
dollar, and I think the physical book's like
Oh,
five
awesome.
bucks. It's great. And he talks about like the book is sort of it's like about a quarter maybe like a personal memoir, but also brings in just sort of like the tradition of like revolutionary black Marxism in the UK and in the US. And one of the like sort of counterpoints to that tradition that he really tries to focus his analysis on, like the class, race, and gender questions, talks about this sort of it's called like Afro pessimism. Some people have equated Ta-Nehisi Coates's some of his writing and that sort of like metaphysicalization of racism and of white supremacy as kind of being similar to that. I actually think that the original version is a lot more extreme than people give Coates for, but we don't need to talk about
Yeah.
Ta-Nehisi Coates is a guy that seems unnecessarily controversial to me, honestly, but whatever.
Yeah, I think the deal with Ta-Nehisi Coates, like, is that, for example, like the Field Sisters have way less of a platform than he does. Um,
Exactly.
and
I love them.
yeah,
They come up a
I
lot in
think
this book.
there's maybe more to this, but the way I think of Ta-Nehisi Coates is like, I noticed I would have some of the similar criticisms about him, but I realized, you know what? It's not his fault that they're choosing to elevate him far above people like Karen and Barbara Fields. Like he
Exactly.
in fact, even though he maybe doesn't do a good job of spreading their message and he's not necessarily interested in the same stuff they are completely, he does name drop them. He's gonna draw
No.
some people to them. But like
Right.
I think it's one of those things where it's like uh I think it is unfortunate that he has a bigger platform than they do, and that a lot of people out there are not seeing their perspective
Right.
along with his,
Right.
and not seeing that they stop at him. But you know what? Can't blame him for that, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, so like this what they call like Afro pessimism, and this idea kind of that just like, these are these, mystical things that cannot be changed, and they just sort of, there's just like this pure essence of this trauma, and it silos all these different groups because it kind of buys into, it just sort of accepts the like conservative framing of, in this case, racial oppression, and these certain identity groups that sort of cannot be broken down. And when I read that thread by Oalowu, and she talks about, how there's this idea of the good faith criticism of this, it just, I don't know, it bothers me because it feels like it's buying into right wing framing, and it feels like it's disarming the criticism, and the like historical power and the chance to build solidarity, in favor of positioning and of manners, and of like, to me it's the thing that, because I follow her, and she writes for a few local like alt weeklies and stuff here, and I've seen her, Oalowu, make a lot of comments that I'm like right on with, around the issue of like, respectability politics and the whole sort of, right wing and centrist, civility panic that's happened over the past 2 weeks. But then when I read this thread, it just feels like the same thing to me.
Same right wing thing, yeah.
It's the same kind of civility idea that you have to respect these people because of what they say. It's that same sort of like liberal institution that fascist and far right people have been abusing for like hundreds of, for like 100 years minimum,
right,
of these like liberal institutions. And I don't know how people don't see that.
I think it's a little bit subtle, and it's like there's two ways that I think it subtly gets in there. One is that you have a lot of white people, and I imagine you might have felt this at some point, especially like we're both in our early 30s. We've both been through the financial crisis. We've both like had blogging identities over time, and wanted a platform of some sort.
Yeah. I need to delete some of my old ones.
Oh my god. Yes. Yeah. But basically, I would have the feeling often like, oh my god, is there a place for me as like a white blogger, even a white Jewish blogger anymore? I grew up thinking, oh, there's so many damn okay writers who look like me out there with a similarly like broad middle class perspective to me, and middle class, slightly like funny, slightly shocking perspective or whatever. And I think a big thing of the Obama era was, maybe you can credit Obama for it. Maybe it was really more that Obama was part of this, was being like, wait a minute, not only are there all these other voices out there, sometimes these other voices can write about mainstream white culture and white politics better than white people can. And that'll make you feel like, wait, do I have a voice anymore? And if you're like someone who really wants to have a voice, and the reason I say a voice is because I feel like that's almost more, especially in the age of like social media, where we have platforms that incentivize us and make us feel like a video game to post all day to try to get attention without getting paid for it.
It is literally the same thing.
It's literally
just looking to get those numbers to be.
It's like
higher.
Tetris, and they make Twitter looks like Tetris. It's flowing down. Let me get my post in there, So like even without getting paid and having a career, there's something about feeling like, that's why I say a voice, is because it's like you just want to get your voice in there and feel like you're part of this, even if it's not your career, even if you're not getting paid for it. And it can be nervous. For me, it was pretty strange to think, oh, maybe my voice is totally irrelevant now. So it's like, what do you do? Especially with like the very extremely short term, extremely detached from reality way that you can end up when you're posting all the time. Be like, oh, maybe if I retweet the right people of color all the time and say, yes, they're right, then I get to still have the voice that I thought I would have. If I do that. And so I think
Oh yeah.
that's one part of um, why we start to see like all these sort of um, why like these things that's as you rightly pointed out are like sort of right wing ideas, sort of short sighted. I think that a lot of them get amplified and not criticized because, understandably, like I often, as I say this, I'm not being like, oh, this is stupid. We should always criticize everything. No, it's like, it's understandably. You're like, this is a popular black voice. Number one, I want to, selfishly, like, I want to keep my voice here, so I don't want to say anything. I don't want to criticize this. And in fact, I want
Right.
to show that I am down with this. And also just this genuine fear of maybe I really don't know, which is amplified by the fact that a lot of people's followers will come at you and think somehow find a way to think of everything you've ever felt a little guilty about and like be like, I bet you do.
Sure. Yeah.
So this
You
this
know.
guy, yeah, I got into a thing with him where I thankfully like just decided to walk away and see if I'd forget his comment, and thankfully I did. Okay, so going back to an earlier thing we were talking about, like what's the line between just like criticizing
Hmm.
stuff that's people are already mad about, jumping on the train, and actually having conversations that very slowly
Yeah.
might like help you and help the people you're talking to. Um, basically, one thing that I think
Right.
you do well, that I try to do, is like, yeah, is I'll separate, like, all right, I
Oh,
want to
thank
write a
you.
whole post about this guy on Medium, because when you're just posting about things that people are mad about, it's like tempting
Hmm.
to do that. But then I'll try to balance that with, like, all right, let me write something short that maybe would be interesting to somebody who spends all their time online like I do, but also maybe touches on like a bigger argument that I think at the very least, someone else who like just sees it would be like, "Oh man, that's a good summary of an idea." Like my like imagined audience is like, yeah, people who post a lot like us, like, and also people who
What are you talking about?
no, I should say like me
You're
anyway. I
right.
think you have a better balance to
Oh,
it than
okay.
I do,
Okay.
and I think I like am more prone to just posting all the time. But
I don't know. I was like fucking dead on
all right,
Tuesday
there you
from
go.
it. So
But
I
I don't know. Basically, like try to like look and be like, all right, this guy and a lot of these other this weird medium guy who we argued with, and like other weird, maybe more famous weird media
mhm,
people. And I think, all right, that's obviously what I'm consuming all day, what I'm thinking about. I just like try to separate like what's the biggest argument here that's relevant that'll like at the very least help you like calm down and see the bigger picture. And like that's what I try to do, and that's what I think a lot of your posts are. You're like, all right,
right.
here's a bigger, simpler picture of all this stuff we're arguing about right now. And like I'll read your posts and be like, oh, okay, cool. And listen to
Right.
this show too. Be like, okay, cool. Here's the thing we can extract out of that. Here's like the more important theme that's going on with all these arguments, and I'll be like, cool, that was great. That's like a nice little package, and like a lot of people, I think that's a good thing to do, especially when we've got like other jobs, other things to do. Is like we can't like if number one, like you said, like just criticizing other media, focusing extremely on that can be not good for you and can be sort of a cyclical thing.
Hmm.
And also, so like, also like related to this, like look at like the shows that like the Majority Report and the Michael Brooks show. That a lot of
Hmm.
them is just taking clips of people who I loved making fun of, like Jordan Peterson
Yeah.
and people like that. It's like, yo, you have to have a lot of time to be able to do that and stay sane, like where you have to be
Exactly.
doing that for
Yeah.
a living. And like,
Exactly. There's no way I could do
yeah,
that for a living. Like I mean I'll listen to those shows and it's like, oh, it's a good way so I don't have to like actually look at the Jordan
yeah.
Peterson book. But you're right. Like it sort of requires a level of psychic devotion to listening to just awful stuff that I don't think I would want to do that to like insist that a regular working person
Big
should have
time.
to
Yeah,
do that.
exactly that. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
as a regular working person, it's like I'm like, all right, what's more productive for me is to like find like a thought that I can have about, oh yeah, this is how it this is kind of how it is, like a truth or a theory, and like that I can move forward with, and to like show that to other people. So like I feel like
Hmm.
that's a good posting mission, and like
Yes.
I feel like that's a consistent thing among what you write and like your sort of I hate the term explainer because I associate it so much with like overly clever stuff. But you know what
I
I mean?
know.
Like with your
I'm the leftist
yeah,
as recline.
in a
Obviously,
way,
that's
like
what you're
the
trying
way
to
I'll
say.
just put it this
There
way,
you
like the
go.
way you summarized MMT and the national debt,
Thank you.
like even like bigger leftist podcasts by people who do it for a profession who talk about that for 2 hours, like you distilled it in a way where I got MMT and then the national debt better than I did from listening to No
Oh, thanks.
Disrespect, but the citations needed. Good show, but no disrespect. But yeah, yeah,
Oh, good. Wow. I think about that. I thought about that show a lot when I was starting to do the solo episodes of this. So I know there's two dudes, but
yeah,
thank you
yeah,
so
yeah.
much. That means a lot. I'll turn that into some
Hell
promo.
yeah,
I'll just play it every day when I wake up. I'm just like, oh Ben, you're all right. You're
hell yeah,
okay. You're
yeah.
okay. You're not just screaming into the void. Speaking of though, I did want to talk about the latest thing that you wrote on the 22nd of June about who goes
Oh yeah.
Nazi. I hadn't read and I haven't read the I guess it's a essay that was
Yeah.
written in what in the
Like
1940s. Yeah, so can you tell us about who Dorothy Thompson is and
um
what that
so
essay was
yeah,
about?
Dorothy Thompson was writing in Harper's and she basically in the early 40s writes about this imaginary dinner party in the US and writes about who of these people would become a Nazi. Uh and the amazing thing about it that I think is almost a good balance to a lot of how we talk about Nazis today, and a lot of conversations. Like I actually just listened to your to the show with Matt Binder, where you talk about the alt right white supremacist gradient,
Oh, thanks.
um, and
Yep.
we have these debates that
Hmm.
are like they're necessary and they're accurate about like yeah who's more Nazi than who. But the thing that you got from Dorothy Thompson, somebody who was very much aware of the homegrown American, Nazi supporters, and also aware of World
Hmm.
War II and aware of like German society, uh, but a civilian in America, not directly under any threat. What you get from reading about her description of who goes Nazi at this dinner party is that it's a gradient, and we're all
Right.
on it. Um, and like no matter who you are, there's a gradient and we're all on it. And the scary thing is sometimes like it's necessary to be aware, like, okay, here's somebody who's harmless now, but you can be pretty sure that the more popular that right-wing movements get, the more they would justify it to be okay with it.
Right.
Whether because their personality is, you know what, I'd rather rationalize things than feel isolated, or they have personal ambitions. And there's a lot of stuff there, but I feel like one thing that's really relevant to how we talk about the alt-right and the sort of hyper confident but actually very insecure young men
Hmm.
who seem to be the face of it is she writes about this personality type where she says, um, yeah, he's a guy who loves debating, basically, and
Right.
he's an extremely independent thinker who likes being
Oh
open to all
god.
ideas. And she says he would become a Nazi,
Yeah.
but then the Nazis would kill him because he's too much of a loose cannon once they took power. And
So we're basically just yeah. Okay. All right. So Dave
Dave
Rubin
Rubin,
was one of these
Dave
guys. Go
Rubin,
on. Go
Peterson,
on. Go
Harris,
on.
Bill Maher, all those
Yeah.
guys.
All
All
those
those
guys.
guys,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
like guys I know, and then like I think of guys I know too, where it's like, yeah, like this guys I know who are into those guys, who I'm like, yeah, I can get along with you. I enjoy debating. ideas, even though you don't really like talking about history or anything that's not theoretical. You just like talking about theoretical atheism, theoretical religion, like just like all those guys, theoretical
Right.
capitalism, which is hilarious. It's like,
Right. Theoretical
and it's like
capitalism.
it's such
Jesus
a
Christ.
it really reminded me that like um, those guys, it's like yeah, they're harmless now, but it's just good to keep in mind that like whether this means you're gonna try to convince them, or it just means that you're gonna sort of accept that in a worse world you wouldn't be friends. It was just a really important perspective, and I think it can get us to better appreciate that there's always going to be material conditions that change and make these things more
Yeah.
possible. And um, like the fact is, we're seeing it now that like, all right, I'm going to use like these funny atheist guys as an example. Like, um, you know, there are people listening who are fans of him, but I'm just gonna go for it. Like Bill Maher in the '90s, material conditions were debt was cheap, uh, anyone
Hmm.
credit was cheap, society was very affluent, and it was really easy for a lot of people, especially like people who weren't if you weren't studying political economy, you'd be like, yo, I think the world is good now. I think we made it. And in that,
Right. There's a reason why the end of
yeah,
history was so like
and in that
relevant in that time
context, I
period.
mean, as a kid, I was like, I and like my mom liked watching this show where it's like, oh wow, history's over, and this guy just wants to debate and joke with people from all kinds of backgrounds. And honestly, yeah, the show is kind of fun. Um, but what we're seeing now is like just in
Yeah.
the light of today, where it's like, all right, there are massive groups of people in the global south of all religions, but yes, most of them happen to be Muslim, who their material circumstances, which are partially created
Hmm.
by being in a desert, but largely created by the U.S. intervention, by like other countries wanting to get the most out of them, for decades, the end result is these places are extremely competitive, just like neoliberal hellscapes. And as a result, those material conditions create certain beliefs. And in
Right.
America here, to look at that and be like, oh man, maybe like maybe like shit is not as good as it was in the 90s. Maybe like I'm becoming more aware of how much the world is fucked up. Like they turn around and be like, you know what? Maybe Islam's the problem. Maybe it's just Islam. Let's just blame Islam
Hmm.
for all that shit. Um, and it's just you see like the material conditions as material conditions of the world change. You think like, all right, maybe somebody like Bill Maher could be like, yo, actually this is fucked up. But especially when you're making money to just like talk about this shit all the time, it's gonna be a lot easier to be like, all right, I'm gonna adjust my worldview to rationalize all this fucked up shit,
Right.
even if that means encouraging hate against a billion people.
Exactly. Well, it's the like parallels with how this sort of this new atheist as an example of maybe who goes Nazi. Um, like the
Hmm.
parallels between maybe how they'll sort of have there will be these material conditions that you talk about, but then the analysis and the answer will then always go to the cultural space is I
Hmm.
think really telling,
Hmm.
because to me it sounds just the same to me as like during like a crime wave. I'm thinking maybe in like sort of like late 70s 80s New York, how like certain racial stereotypes will sort of be created or like reinforced
Hmm.
about maybe like black and Latino criminality. You think about even the to bring it back to these people, like things like the bell
Yeah.
curve and how that can it sort of normalizes the idea that that can happen, and then we just have this idea reinforced with pseudoscience that blacks are just more criminal, and
Hmm.
it's disgusting, and it's the same thing that happens if you refuse to examine
Yeah.
the material realities and the
Yeah,
material
definitely. It's a thing
conditions.
where like no matter what you want to say about class reductionism and that whole idea, which is really you're saying, oh, you reduced everything to material
Hmm.
conditions. It's like, yeah, I get that it is overly reductive, but with that, exactly.
Oh yeah, I mean, Well, the problem is that is that white supremacy
Exactly.
in America is a part of the material conditions, and that's where people don't. That's where it
Yeah.
gets
You know what? Here's a weird a
mixed up.
theory I just came
I
up with,
think
just because
so.
this is an idea I find I come back to a lot in arguments or just yeah,
Oh,
like
theorize.
this idea of like the class versus race thing, which ultimately like the well-intentioned stop
Yeah.
talking about class, make it about race thing, often ends up leaving a lot of room for people to be like, all right, well, if we're only talking about culture, only talking about race, uh, I can just also point out race science because you're not talking about economics. So you don't have a comeback if I say
Right.
the bell curve is right, you know. Um, it's like when you erase economics, you don't have a counter to
Exactly.
that, and
Exactly.
I'm not blaming people for that, but I'm saying it makes it easier for these toxic when the positive ideas, anti-racist ideas, also ignore economics. It makes it easy for racist ideas that ignore economics to keep
Right.
flourishing because I think that in a place where when people talk about systemic racism, they talk more about the material conditions, talk about black wealth, talk about the very obvious ways that these things are not determined by
Right.
culture,
Exactly.
by
Right. I'm
ideas.
just asking
I
questions.
think that these racist, yeah, just asking questions. It's like, well, if there were more people, if there were more people to just be like, that's obviously bullshit. I think maybe we'd only have 10, 20% less acceptance of this
Right.
shit. But you know what? That would be a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I think the way forward with these kinds of conversations is with campaigns like, Alexandra Octavia Cortez's. Like
Yes.
I think there's a way forward that I'm seeing, and that's really like it was a shitty week in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
news wise, especially with the Supreme Court. Um, but seeing that, and seeing a lot of people in my life who I've tried to talk to socialism about, and they
Hmm.
don't give a shit, you know.
Hmm.
But I think when they see someone win
Oh
and
yeah.
someone who sort of connects all these different interests and all these different aspects and sort of connects the way that the material politics affects racial minorities and working class people, like she represents them not just because she looks like them or because she's young, but because like her vision is
Yes.
complete.
Yes. Yeah. Representation matters, and she represents Latinx people. She represents women, and she represents leftism, and she represents progressivism. All those things are things where
Yeah,
representation matters equally.
yeah,
You know,
exactly.
and it's you even representation
Yeah,
matters, but you got to check
yeah,
off more boxes. I feel like that's there's just should be more boxes.
yeah,
I'm repeating myself with the
exactly.
boxes, but yeah, yeah.
More boxes,
Um,
yeah. No, 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 no. Yeah, I totally, absolutely. It's before we go, I because
yes.
both of our names are Benjamin, you know, I realized there's a lot of famous Bens, and especially famous Bens in politics. So I thought we could maybe play a little
Hell
game.
yeah.
Um, like fuck Mary kill. Let's
Hell
say
yeah.
fuck Mary cancel. Fuck Mary
Yo, that's a
cancel, you
great
know?
reformation of
So
that. Yes.
there you go. There you go. Exactly. And I'm kind of over gulags,
Hmm.
so I just you're just canceled. You're just out
Yeah.
of my life. Bye
Great.
bye. So I'm trying to think how I'm going to do this. I just have a few lists. I'm not sure if you're going to know all these, but
Mm.
I'm excited to do this. So we'll see, you know, where we're going, where we're coming from. We're going to start with some
All
big
right.
ones. Benjamin Franklin, Ben Stein, and Ben Carson.
Oh.
Do you know who
Oh, I
Ben
know who all
Stein
these
is?
guys are. Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, yeah, I was good. Do you know who
All
Benjamin
right, I
Franklin
would fuck
is?
Benjamin Franklin. I know that much.
Yeah,
Oh wait,
dirty,
hold
dirty
on.
dog.
Can we not say the F word on this podcast? All right, cool.
No, it's
If you
fine.
got if you get censured by somebody, if I don't know how the standards work there.
Yeah,
All
it's
right, so
fine.
yeah, we'll say fuck in the game. Yeah.
Who would you marry, Ben Carson or Ben
It's
Stein?
so tough because the other two bands are rough.
Okay, okay.
Yo, I'm gonna revise this a bit. I would, uh, I would fuck Ben Carson, marry Ben Franklin, cancel Ben Stein, because you know what? At the end of the day, Ben Stein has been uh, a big force in conservative politics. Who's contrary to his movie cameos, he's not actually that funny a guy. He's like a real political operative.
No,
He worked
he
for
like worked
Nixon,
for
exactly.
Nixon.
Yeah, he did some real stuff, some real shit. Ben Carson, you can
Yeah,
fuck Ben Carson because he, yeah, Ben Carson, he's gonna come and go. He's the HUD secretary, but maybe if you fuck Ben Carson, you could convince
exactly.
him that if you rebuild, if you restart public housing, you're talking to him in the morning. You're like, Ben Carson, I had a vision while we were having sex. It's that if you build
There you go.
more
Yeah,
public housing, it'll in the form of a cross across America. Jesus will, the Jesus space God that you believe
yeah,
in will see it, and then then we'll get into
yeah,
the what's it called, the rapture. You could convince Ben Carson of that. I feel like so it's worth it. Ben Frank, yeah,
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 for sure.
and
Okay,
Ben
yeah,
Franklin.
solid,
End of
solid.
the day, you know what? Ben Franklin was the original ideas guy, but I forgive him. The original. It's all about ideas. All about ideas. Hey, now let's just debate ideas. Yeah,
he
yeah,
he kind of was, wasn't he? He was sort of the Jordan Peterson of the founding fathers. He was like a little bit older. He sort of had,
yeah.
was a little washed up. I don't know what what Jordan Peterson does on his
Oh
on
yeah,
the tour, but I'm
yeah,
sure he enjoys
yeah.
himself
But
in
you know
some
what?
ways
You
that
know what it
Benjamin
is? Back
Franklin
in the
maybe did.
1700s, with all that shit, with both the context of slavery and that stage of capitalism,
Hmm.
you can kind of be like, all right, Ben Franklin was a normal
Yeah,
ideas guy in that context, and yeah, whereas this Jordan Peterson's that of today. It's just that today is
yeah,
a
he's
more
a good
fucked up time, so
ideas
you end
guy.
up with
Yeah,
this scary half Muppet, half man creature out there. Whereas Ben
right,
Franklin, Ben
exactly.
Franklin kind of looked like a Muppet too, but a better one.
I was gonna say, I think he also was a half Muppet. He was more like, what's like the big giant Muppet that was like one of the like men suits versus the
Oh, like the
puppet.
critic,
I can't
like one of the
remember.
critic Muppets. Oh, the guy with the top
No,
hat
I'm thinking there's
the
something
monocle.
bigger.
Yeah.
All
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Just like a real big Muppet, I guess. For some reason, I feel like
Oh
Benjamin
yeah, he was.
Franklin was like a
Better
really
Muppet,
large
better
man.
ideas guy, right?
Um,
The one
okay.
ideas guy you want to marry.
There you go. There you go. That's absolutely true. Very much. Okay, great. I think I pretty much agree with that. One thing that's very important about Ben Carson, though, is if you marry him, you get to move into his house that's
Oh,
covered
that's
with
right.
portraits of
That's a good
him
point.
with
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. That's the only reason. Also, I have a feeling he's running a pretty good grift. So you heard about like this, like he has like a
Oh
$25,000
yeah.
table or
Yeah.
something. So stuff's going all
Hell yeah.
right. Let's do another round. We're gonna do. I guess Ben Stein's Jewish too, but we're gonna do some of my favorite Jewish Bens in politics. We're gonna do Facts Don't Care About Your Feelings, Ben Shapiro. We're gonna do Benjamin Netanyahu. And I'm gonna say, Ben Bernanke, the old chairman of the Fed. I feel like he's like a little bit outside of that, but I think that's like a good little group. So, what would you do with Ben
Yo, this is
Shapiro?
a really tough one because this is the only. Oh my God! But just when he's in that company, you'd have to
Hmm.
fuck Ben Shapiro. I
You're
can't see another
right.
option. It's
Exactly.
because if you don't fuck Ben Shapiro, you don't get to cancel Benjamin Netanyahu. If I am
Exactly.
cancelled, then the end times will come without me,
Yeah.
and that would be a great aggression against in the support of terrorism. I don't just you can do it. You have to
Yeah.
cancel Benjamin Netanyahu.
Are you from Israel? That
Most of
was
my
so real. I
most of
felt
my
like I was
teachers
in
were
Tel
Israeli,
Aviv.
and I lived there for like a couple
Oh, okay,
months
there you go. There
when
you
I
go.
was in my early 20s. Yeah, so I picked up
Okay,
on
all right.
that. But Netanyahu just
Okay,
has the
all right,
best
good.
combo of like a Philly mainline suburb guy with like an Israeli, just the Israeli,
Yes.
you know?
I was
Yeah.
Yes. I know, it's such a funny combo. I love the I mean the like I guess the like the regional Pennsylvania accents between Pittsburgh and Philly are it's arguably the two best accents in the entire country. And I was explaining to my wife this morning that Netanyahu has like roots in Philly, and she was like,
Yeah.
"What? That's
Yeah.
so weird."
Yeah.
It is
And you
weird.
could just
Yeah,
imagine him
yeah.
fitting in there. That's the weird part. He was
So I
like, "Oh yeah, I
guess
guess I could sit,"
yeah.
and being like, you know,
I know.
well,
Going down to Wawa.
in Wawa, you get a voucher sometimes, and then you can get free gas on the way to the Eagles game.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Also,
You could just
Palestinians are
imagine
not a
him
real
like
people.
coming up with his
Sorry, that was
his
yeah.
like worldview, just applying it to Philly, just to be like he would find he would like just keep on using some old rumor of South Philly for years they have been building a nuclear dog, and it is. This is very true. I have many documents and I've read them. I'm afraid to share them, but I must share them. If we do not destroy
Yeah.
South Philadelphia, North Philadelphia cannot flourish. We must destroy this nuclear dog. Like,
Yes. Something about like they're
yeah,
they're like attaching
when South
bombs to the Philly
Philadelphians love
fanatic or something.
South Philadelphia,
You know.
it is not love, it is terrorism. And when we love North Philadelphia, it is love. It is different. Oh my God! The Benjamin Netanyahu is just the guy who gets in your head. That's why you have to cancel him.
Yes.
He just gets in your head.
Yeah, you have to. You have to. Oh, I mean, he's terrible, and his like family's just like a bunch of crooks, and his son is like a alt-right fail son. It's just he's amazing, but yeah, he definitely would deserve to be canceled. So you're gonna marry the ex-Fed chairman Ben Bernanke? I think that's pretty obvious. I
Yeah,
think that's pretty obvious.
yeah. You're with him long
Yeah,
enough.
Ben.
You can explain MMT to him.
Exactly. There you go. Ben Shalom Bernanke. His middle name is literally
Yes.
Shalom. So,
Did not know that. Great to know.
yeah, good. And that's what I learned when I Googled famous Bens, and I went through it. There was a lot of celebrities, and I was like, these are not my celebrities. I'm talking about
Yeah.
Ben Bernanke. That's my celebrity.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do one of that are all pretty good. I'm gonna say Ben Jealous, who just won the Democratic primary in Maryland. He's like a former president of the NAACP.
Right.
He's like very strong. He's very good.
Yeah.
So him, he's a good dude. Ben Kingsley as Gandhi. And I don't know if you watch the show. You probably don't. Do you watch the Bachelor? Do you know that the show The
I've
Bachelor?
watched a bit of The Bachelor here and there. I'm trying to remember the Ben. Like, see if you can refresh my memory. When
Okay. Well, he was the Bachelor, I think, last year. His name's
I've only
Ben
watched
Higgins.
it this year.
He's
I
like
wish I had seen it. Yeah, no. Tell me more about
bummer.
it. I know
Okay,
enough
well,
about The Bachelor. I
that's
feel like I
okay.
can
That's
fill in the
okay.
details. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah. So he's like just like one of those real boring, just like tall white dudes. Just he looks like he's from The Bachelor, And on the back, on like the side of his back, he has just like tons of like Bible verses and crosses and stuff. He's very Christian-y. He's from like Colorado. Every time they went to go visit his family, it was like at like the family lake house. He just seems just like a little handsome rich kid. But he ran for state senate as a Republican. before or like he was going to run, but then when he got picked as the Bachelor, he had to like cancel it. So
All
he's
right.
technically a Ben
Yep.
in politics. So Ben
Yeah.
Higgins, he's another Ben. So sorry. So we have Ben Jealous, Ben Kingsley as Gandhi, and Ben Higgins
I have
from
to
The
say that was the
Bachelor.
best Bachelor recap I ever heard. I feel like from the show, what I've seen of the recent seasons, I can totally fill in
Oh,
what this guy's
the
season was like. Yeah.
the show is designed to take a long time explaining what's
Yeah.
happening because it has to
Yeah.
fill up 2 hours of TV time. So you can like there's a ton of like Bachelor podcast and stuff you can find
Mm.
that'll clear it up really quickly. You'd be
Yeah.
shocked
No, yeah, that's
at
true.
how
Like
little
I
actually
feel like
happens.
I do very easily get the gist of it from like having it on in the other room while I'm doing something else. Like it's so true.
Hmm.
But anyway, back to the real task at hand.
There you
Um,
go.
Ben Kingsley,
Yeah.
Ben Higgins,
Yes.
and
Yes.
what's the third Ben again?
Ben
Ben Jealous. All right.
Ben
Yeah.
Jealous. The only Ben who actually is going to hopefully
Yeah.
have political
This is the
power.
easiest. This is the easiest one. For me, you got to marry Ben Jealous.
Yeah.
You got to fuck Ben Kingsley as Gandhi,
Yep.
and you got to
Yep.
cancel Ben Higgins.
Yes. Yes. I really and the fucking Ben Kingsley. He has to be as Gandhi. That's part
Yeah.
of it. So you're committing to having sex with like one of the greatest like leaders of the 20th century.
Yeah. See,
Fair
that's it.
enough. I agree.
I'm glad that we both get it. We both understand this. So the
Yeah.
funny thing about
There you go.
the thing I just realized about this game, about the marry fuck cancel game, is um,
Hmm.
that like sorry, I just got distracted with something. You're gonna edit out. Hopefully, gonna edit out this pause. Um,
It's fine.
yeah,
I want to add a little bit
yeah.
of, levity, not just comments and me again probably saying something that was
Yeah.
offensive to a local
Oh,
writer who I tend to
yeah.
like. So
You know what? Maybe
I don't know.
if this
We'll
could
see.
like tie together what we've been what we've been saying before
Yeah.
about Aluo, the like okay, so compare the worldview that
Hmm.
rubbed us both the wrong way, even though we couldn't quite put a finger on it about Aluo, and contrast that with just
Hmm.
thinking about the latest
Yeah.
news regarding this amazingly successful primary challenge and the impending doom of Kennedy's retirement is
Yeah.
all right. So look at the material reality is that like yeah, you know what? Let's center this on like the Kennedy retirement. That's an extremely doom laden scenario. It's a lot less doom laden if you actually consider something that actually Ruth Bader Ginsburg has said,
Hmm.
which is that you can't actually rely on the Supreme Court to get your politics through. You can't. It's some technocratic shit that we can't rely on, really. And she said, yeah, I don't think Roe was as successful as if each state had legalized it. She also talks about how, Roe was sort of like a sneaky way to try to get in there. Let's take to the Supreme Court a case about the right of doctors to do this. She said, what if each state had built a grassroots movement and got judges on their side? Or not even each state. What if a lot of states, especially the big progressive states, had a
Right.
grassroots movement with a lot of people instead of just the experts getting together and saying, we want to legalize a woman's right to get an abortion. Eventually,
Right. Explicitly, like, this is what we want. It's not like because like I've spoken to on this feed, sometimes I'll have
oh,
my
I
friend
love Ari,
Ari
yeah.
on, and they're a law student. Okay, yeah, Ari's great. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I hope that they're studying for the bar right now. But they were talking about this because like I threw a little bit of a bomb on Twitter, being a little angry that RGB
Yeah.
didn't or RBG
Mhm.
didn't retire. They got kind of mad at me, and I think they're right in a lot of ways because about it, and they emphasized that
Mhm.
point that RBG made, that it's
Yes.
that we're looking to the courts for the wrong reason. The courts are they're like the stopgap. You shouldn't, they're like the emergency brake on your car.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be using that to
Yeah.
park or to like
Yeah,
slow
that's such a
down.
good description
You
of it. Was
know,
that you or Ari's creation?
I did the I did the emergency brake thing just because I've been playing
Nice,
racing
nice.
games on
Yeah.
my
Yeah,
computer.
and you know
But
what? That I think might be a good metaphor for all backdoor, clever technocratic, Clintonite style solutions, such as like, which is what Roke, obviously
yeah,
not technically Clintonite. I know it was 20 years before, but it's one of those
yeah.
technocratic.
They own
That's a
that
good point. It's like you
movement. You
can
know
retroactively call that stuff Clintonite stuff. Like the emergency brake, like
exactly,
technocratic solutions are emergency brakes that can be undone. Like emergency brakes, like you can just eventually take them
exactly.
off. And that's what Roe was. And
Right.
so like, okay, to look at the doom laden scenario of Kennedy's retirement. Um, and then one direction you can look in is Aluo's the worldview that we sort of are seeing in Aluo's thread, which is ultimately sort of like that kind of identity politics of I own this trauma is a way of managing the
Yeah.
status quo of,
Yeah.
like, to be dramatic about it, a declining society. To say, okay, I'm going to manage the status quo here for myself by
Yes.
invoking this trauma the way that what different groups of white people have for centuries, to be like, how do I get in on this by sort of you know either like doing it straight, or in Aluo's case, it's kind of like showing that you understand that white way of invoking trauma to get your piece of a declining society. And so that's
Right.
that's one way forward.
Yeah. Versus trying to stop it from
Exactly. And
declining.
Cortez's situation is, you know what? Cortez's victory, not only did it not happen because of trusting technocratic solutions, it literally was a lot of people
Yeah.
spending a few hours a week or less to fight against the top-down
Hmm.
technocratic view of solving our problems. You know what I mean? And that should be a real
Exactly.
sign of hope. Like,
Totally.
obviously, it's not just about
Yeah.
not about just about electing people, but about the fact that, yes, like taking the view that people
Hmm.
took toward electing Cortez of we all need to chip in a little because this will save us and technocracy will not. You can fight for reproductive rights
Right.
that way, and that's what we have to just do that, and
Right.
to avoid just the to avoid pure trauma, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's the thing that as you're talking about that sort of managing kind of model of how to deal with
Mhm.
a declining society. What it always seems like to me is in that worldview, there's no room for
Yeah,
solidarity, and that's like I feel like maybe that's the biggest difference between sort of so-called leftist and
mhm.
liberals.
Right.
There's all these debates right now about like who's a socialist,
Mhm.
who's a leftist. Are you just a social democrat? You're a loser or whatever. You're just an anarchist. You don't give it. You don't care. Blah blah blah. But like to me, that seems to be one of the fundamental differences. It's that technocratic worldview that doesn't place an ability for solidarity to actually be built or for sharing of these stories and of these images and iconography of trauma is
Mhm.
like the concentration camp example is hearing Holocaust survivors coming out and saying
Mhm.
this is similar. Like that's so powerful. Why would we then say that we
Right.
can only let certain people say it? Like if it is as bad as we act like it is, why are
Right.
we
Yeah, but
holding back anything?
yeah, it's a thing where the solidarity that you could feel from recognizing shared problems, shared struggles, shared interests ultimately. The solidarity that you could happen from shared interests
Hmm.
often can coexist. And I think
Right.
to an extent, at least it looked like this was happening in the Obama years. You had on one hand the real, true shared interests combined with the the side that's about like, no, let's talk about who owns the right to say this, which
Right.
is honestly obviously that's something you've got to debate a lot of the time. But
Yeah.
there's a thing where what we're seeing today is I think those things that sort of safely coexisted, we're having a thing where the people who are the most orthodox about like identity and owning trauma. I won't even call it identity. It's owning trauma particularly. People the most
Yeah. It is. It is very much because it's people, or it's like a worldview that identity is just built up of
yes.
trauma.
Yes.
It's almost separate from how they relate to the rest of society. It's about how their trauma.
Yes.
It's like how much are you traumatized
Yes.
because of your identity, and it's even within that it leaves out things that people decry about identity politics that are really
Yes.
great.
Right. Yeah,
So
that's a good point. Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. It is about focusing on that aspect of identity because it's if you focus on the trauma, it's actually and I would imagine it's something that Heider says is like that probably sort of that carves out a very specific aspect of identity. And in fact, if you are open to all the other aspects of identity, I think that opens you more up to solidarity. Um, when you think exploring other aspects of
right,
identity that aren't trauma makes you realize the more common shared interests in, for lack of a better way to say it, having an identity. That's that's you know that makes you realize, oh, we have this in common.
right,
Um, and I think we're seeing a situation where those things coexisted for a while, but uh, now eventually the the identity as trauma, the people who are most orthodox about that are coming in conflict with solidarity, and the difficult part is like how to how to not go too far with helping to pull that back because you really don't want to go too far with saying identity
right.
politics is wrong. Hell no, hell no. But like that's
No,
you know
absolutely
I feel like
not.
that's the challenge, right?
Exactly.